Hello, BookTube. This is the latest book I have managed to complete. This is J. Randy Taraborelli's biography of Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes, a performer who I highly esteem. He is among my favorite artists of all time. Uh, I regularly listen to so many of his wonderful recordings and even sing along to them, not just in the shower, but also in the living room, in the kitchen, and wherever else I get a chance to honor and pay tribute to this most extraordinary of singers and of show business people. And I think that he is among the finest products of 20th century American popular culture ever to exist. I think that we are very blessed and very fortunate to have had such a superlative performer and entertainer in our midst, and to have so much of his wonderful music over a lifetime of artistry and mastery of his art, of his craft. Uh, an ability to interpret a lyric, an ability to communicate a heartfelt emotion to the listener in such a powerful way, in a way that is still very much unrivaled by so many other singers out there, so many imitation Sinatras that you have today, people like Michael Bublé, who I don't care for at all. And this was a highly enjoyable read about Frank Sinatra's life. I was afraid when I first read it that it would be a sort of saccharine tribute. This was just going by what I read in the introduction. However, far from being a starry-eyed hagiography, this was very much a critical biography. As much as the author is sympathetic towards Frank Sinatra, he doesn't shy away from his darker sides, which he really can't in any biography of Sinatra worth its salt. You have to pay close attention to the man's serious flaws. For starters, he was incredibly insecure, prone to depression, prone to fits of rage and violence. He would often lash out at those he perceived as having betrayed him or let him down, and he would often cut them off ruthlessly, regardless of whether they were old friends or not, regardless of whether they had served him loyally for many years or not. He would simply cut them off and treat them as if they did not exist. And certainly, if the way he treated his wife, Mia Farrow, his third wife, is anything to go by, or the way he treated his fiancée, Lauren Bacall, who he was going to marry before he called off the engagement at the last minute, if the way he treated these people is anything to go by, then he was certainly not a man who would put sentiment ahead of pride in such circumstances when he felt that his honor had been seriously wounded. And it is an unfortunate aspect of this man, but nevertheless can't take away, I don't think, from the brilliance of Sinatra as an artist. And I think you may well detect in that sentence a lyric from one of his most famous songs, "They Can't Take That Away From Me," which I am very fond of. But through it all, he did it, to quote a phrase, his way, and you can't help but admire how this plucky boy from Hoboken, New Jersey, was able to climb the greasy pole all the way to becoming the greatest living interpreter of American song in the history of American popular music. And Taraborelli tells the whole story from a childhood lived in relatively modest conditions, although not as poor as Sinatra later liked to make out, in the town of Hoboken, New Jersey, where he was ruled over by a rather tyrannical, shall we say, mother, Dolly, who was a very formidable woman. If anything in this book is to go by, she was a very significant personage in the town. She was very well connected in politics. She was a proud supporter of the Democratic Party, and she transferred these political allegiances to her son. She was a networker and a fixer. People knew her as someone who you could go to get favors from, to get a job, to get a promotion, to get an abortion, even, which was actually the most controversial aspect of her career. She was, in fact, a midwife without any license, without any sort of qualification, but she was, in fact, someone who would go to the houses or to the back streets and perform abortions for young girls who had gotten themselves into very hapless and even hopeless situations. And this is actually something that went against her in terms of her reputation with those who knew about what she did. And Sinatra was horrified by these actions and was disgusted with his mother for participating in them. But for all that, she did, in fact, give Sinatra an awful lot of the, you could say, hard-headedness that he needed to succeed in entertainment. And despite some initial resistance from his parents, when Sinatra revealed that he wanted to be a singer, they supported him, they pushed him, they encouraged him, and Dolly, in particular, his mother, went out of her way in order to secure for Sinatra many of his first performance, a couple of his first performances, actually. So that was interesting to read about. From a very early age, Sinatra was a magician when it came to the ladies. He was, even as a teenager, someone who was silver-tongued enough to be able to lure any unsuspecting young maiden into bed with him. And that, of course, is something that actually remained a staple of his life over the whole course of his many, many decades in show business. And this would, of course, manifest itself in the explosive divorce that he had from his first wife, Nancy, his tempestuous marriage to Ava Gardner, who ended up ditching him, after which he swore on the Bible, supposedly in front of his friend Sammy Davis Jr., that he would never allow a woman to get that close to him again, which is a fascinating insight into just how much Gardner embittered him towards the female species, that he took such a drastic step of swearing an oath on the Bible. This a man who was not, in fact, deeply religious at all, swearing an oath on the Bible that he would never again allow a woman to get so close to him. And indeed, I think he actually did remain true to this. He never again allowed himself to become as deeply in love with any woman as he had become with Ava. And if you read the accounts of his marriages with Mia Farrow and Barbara Sinatra, his last wife, as much as he cared for them in his own way, I don't believe that they were ever as intense loves for him as Ava Gardner was. But moving away from his rather tempestuous and tumultuous private life, I think that what I would really like to talk about is the music. And, of course, for someone like myself, who is already so familiar with Sinatra's music, it's perhaps easier for me to appreciate just what a phenomenon Sinatra was. But for those at the time who were observing his career in real time, as it played out, he was very much a phenomenon. Simply the way in which he would hold the microphone when he sung and handle it as if he were handling the delicate body of a very attractive female. That communicated to his early audiences a powerful sexual energy that was deeply attractive to the fanatical Bobby Soxers, these young women who would turn out to his performances and who would faint and who would sigh over this rather skinny young Italian-American from Hoboken, who wasn't by any means the most handsome man in the world, and yet he held so many young girls in thrall. And he was blessed, of course, with a God-given talent of his voice, his luscious lyric baritone, with which he interpreted so many of the finest American classics of that day. He was inspired deeply by people such as Bing Crosby, the pioneer of what became known as crooning. Although, unlike Crosby, he would develop a style of his own, a style entirely unique to him, one which communicated a real energy and emotion and excitement, as opposed to Bing Crosby's more laid back crooning style. And this was what made Sinatra such a phenomenon, such a novelty in the period in which we are discussing his early career. And now Sinatra, as a young man, was egotistical. He would be egotistical his entire life. And this could make things strained and stressful in terms of his relationships with his colleagues, especially the bands which he was involved in as a young man. And the singers in those the artists in those bands took a while to warm to this rather scrappy, rather cocky young man from Hoboken. But they were soon won over by the power of his voice, by the power of his singing. And he got, you could say, actually too big for his boots at one point. Big enough that he was courageous enough to split from the leader of the band he was with, Tommy Dorsey, and somehow get himself out of his rather dubious contract in which almost all of his earnings were ending up in Tommy Dorsey's pockets. And he was able to extricate himself from that, supposedly with the help of the mafia, and indeed his mafia ties would dog him for his entire life. And he would go on to enjoy a very successful career as a solo performer, which was not, of course, without its highs and lows. And those who know the story well know that at some point in the early 1940s, his womanizing and his affair with Ava Gardner tarnished his reputation so much that it actually led to him, it looked like for a moment he would actually drop out of the music business. It looked like his career was over. And it was only really in the early 1950s, early to mid 1950s, that things would pick up again for him. And one big thing which enabled him to do that was his starring role in the film From Here to Eternity, in which he played the role of this plucky Italian-American soldier called Joe Macchio. And he did such a stunning job in this character, that he was able to essentially resurrect his career. And it was in large part thanks to Ava Gardner, his second wife, lobbying for him that he was able to achieve this. So that was fascinating to read about. And, of course, as we know, things went south with Ava. But his career, nevertheless, went from strength to strength. And his career in the 1950s was actually even more impressive than anything which had come before it. And this is where we actually start to see so many of the definitive Sinatra recordings, like I've Got You Under My Skin, which is one of my personal favorite Sinatra songs of all time. And no one who listens to that recording can listen to it and fail to be blown away by the power of not just Sinatra's interpretation, but also the arrangement of that particular recording, the genius of Nelson Riddle at work, of course, in that particular recording. And he would go on to become bigger than ever before. It was the most extraordinary rise and fall, and then rise and resurrection, in fact, of any career in American popular music that you can think of, perhaps in all of American popular culture. And his career would, of course, go on to blossom in the 60s. Even as late as the 80s and 90s, he was performing as an old man. He was nevertheless on stage, on television, even in failing health, even as things seemed to be slipping away, as he was forgetting words, as he was having surgery for this or that ailment, he still kept going. And that, of course, is something which you can only admire him for. Of course, even old Blue Eyes knew when to quit when the going got a bit too tough, and it was only a few years before his death in 1998 that he finally hung up his shoes and spent the rest of his life in retirement. And it was a rather sad and pitiful end for him in later years, battling all sorts of health ailments and this and that. But you can't help but marvel at what this man was able to achieve. And this was a fantastic reading experience. I learned all sorts of things about his marriage to Barbara Sinatra, about his relationship with Mia Farrow that I didn't know about, his relationship with his children, the impact on him of his son being kidnapped as well in 1963. That was riveting and indeed horrifying to read about. Um, J. Randy Taraborelli's book is, I would say, a masterpiece. I really enjoyed it. This was not the saccharine hagiography I was afraid it would be. This was, in fact, a soup to nuts, warts and all biography, and I can't recommend it strongly enough. So there you go, and I will leave it there for now. Bye for now, BookTube.